how did you get into this genre of writing, and were you a big reader? What were your experiences which got you to this space?
Right. So I was a big reader as a child. So, but I was from a very small. I am from a very small hometown. My town is really really small, and we didn't have, a good library, or we didn't have very many books at our hands. So what was available was Enid Blyton books, and that I devoured. You know, and then like I think all the people are in my time, there's a big gap between children's book and adults book. There's a they don't there was not enough books to fill in that gap. Middle grade books, I mean.
Tell me more. Like, was there a moment where you felt that writing for children is something that it just wasn't something that was a task for you, but meant something a lot more
There
than
was
that?
no specific moment when I felt that, okay, this is what I want to do. I think it was more of a growing feeling that developed over the years. So I always loved writing as a child, as a student, and I was always the English teacher's pet and all that. And I always loved children as well. So I think this combination of my two passions just happened organically. And uh, I feel very encouraged when people who have read my books come to me and tell me that they liked what they read, or that they feel inspired by my words, or their child has been inspired by it. And um, that's when I feel, yeah, yes, that this is what I want to continue doing. Or when after a lot of rejections and disappointments and heartaches, and a lot of writing, rewriting, sending it out to publishers and then writing again, and all of that, I asked myself, do you want to continue doing this? I a lot of not just emotional, pain, but a lot of my I feel all my muscles aching and all of that. Do you want to go through all of that? And every time the answer is yes. And so I know, yeah, this is what I want to continue doing for the rest of my life.
Always been like, even with your most recent work, it's about rediscovering your roots and your
Yeah.
identity. You mentioned that I grew up in a space where you didn't have access to a lot of reading resources. So what is it that connects? Is that something that was in your mind when, and what motivated you to write the theme of your most recent work?
The most recent one, yeah. Sometimes you know distance gives you that perspective, and you feel like going back to your roots, and that's exactly what happened with me. Though I grew up immersed in culture, I when I grew up, and I moved out of my country, I moved out of my hometown. At first, I was very excited because I was exploring new lands, exploring new, culture and all of that. I did not miss my hometown. I did not miss my culture. But then you come to a point in life when you feel that pull back. You want to go back to your roots, and when you're immersed in culture, you don't. Everything about it seems ordinary, because everything is so within reach and ever accessible, and you don't realize its beauty and value. But distance, gives you that perspective, gives you that space to think and reflect and compare, and then you know how distinctive and meaningful your culture is. It can bring back all those memories of fun and laughter, that feeling of safety and security that you felt growing up. And that's the reason that you want to go back to it. So when I write books, one thing is very clear, that I want to bring out aspects of my culture that the world knows very little about. So that's what I try to do with every book, and that's what my latest book is also about. It's about a girl, who is who's a warrior, and the entire story revolves around that martial art.
And do you think a big part of inheritance is the stories and the works of writing that are left behind and the stories that are told? How big a role do you think that those play when we speak of inheriting something which is not material per se?
Yeah. Your stories play a big part, in passing on your culture and in your tradition and all of that. Um, See, every generation, I think, shapes the culture, because what doesn't sit well with them, they're not going to pass it on, right? So, um, when I write something, I try to bring the richness of my culture in all my books, and I want my readers to think of culture as something they need to understand and appreciate, and respect, rather than something they have to blindly follow. So, um, you know, in my first book, I talk about how the main character uh, is is protesting against the use of elephants in a temple festival, and the second one talks about gender discrimination. She embraces her culture, but yet she uh, is not getting to be a part of her culture because of the discrimination. So um, things like values like um, peace and harmony and courage, empathy, kindness, all those that promote um, you know uh, feelings of peace and harmony is what you need to carry forward. And I think every generation has this wonderful responsibility of deciding what the next generation can inherit. And that's what I try to do in my books as well. And through stories that nurture these feelings, um, a wonderful a way of preserving our culture. And but yet we need to this generation needs to understand that you have to be strong enough to question anything that does not reflect these values. So um, yeah.
How do you balance this out? Like you mentioned that this generation needs to. It's all about balance, right? That you inherit these stories, you learn about culture and tradition, but you also learn to question it and in some ways rebel against it. So, as a writer who's written extensively, like even like your last book, if I'm right, I'm Archa. It's like a tale which is not told so often or spoken of. So, bringing that in the spotlight, but at the same time, how does an author strike the balance between storytelling and having the current generation connect with it? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. I think it's actually it's pretty easy once you know the values that some values like empathy and resilience and all of that are timeless values that every generation needs, to survive. And what we need to understand is that culture doesn't survive because it does not change. It survives because evolves, over generations. And we need to show this change as part of the tradition, right? So in a story, you don't just tell the readers that a certain custom or a practice is wrong and just end the story there, or just end your argument there. You need to show that it's part of the part of the process. And my stories suggest that accepting a culture doesn't mean accepting every custom unchanged. You can carry forward its best values while recognizing that customs need to evolve. And um, and um, you know I want my readers to inherit their culture with pride and curiosity. And I want them to cherish its richness and understand its importance and feel empowered to question, to make a change. So that's why the ending of my stories, I try to bring out something. I try to make it a big dramatic ending, so that children feel that they have the power to make a change.
Mentioned that it's not just about preserving a story or preserving knowledge, but also how transformative that story can be for the reader. And what kind of a conversation do you hope that for a child reading say I'm Archa, that's
Yeah, the hope is that they start understanding that being young doesn't mean that they have no power. You know, every child has the power to make a, a change, however small it is. You know, so that's the main thing that I want to tell them. And also that there are a lot of qualities inherent in them that they need to recognize. And reading stories is one way of identifying that quality or that power within themselves and using that in real life.
using poetry as a way of uh, writing. So, how did that happen, and what draws you to poetry as a storyteller?
I love poetry and I love verse novels. So in poetry, no, sorry, in prose, you tend to use words and dialogues that you use in everyday life, um, because you need to ground your readers to reality. But poetry gives you that freedom to use wonderful, extraordinary words and metaphors and similes, and it won't appear strange or out of place. Um, and when I first read a verse novel, it just blew my mind because of the economy of words, right? So few words and so many big things to narrate. And verse novels have that power. They It uses the right words for the right emotions, and it leaves such a big impact on you because it reads like poetry, right? So what I believe is verse novel is the best thing that could have happened in children's literature, because the time being that children are spending more and more time in front of the screen and their attention span is coming down so much. And when you place a book in front of them, they get very overwhelmed, And but verse novels, um, it narrates a whole story with such few words that leaves a lot of white space on the pages, and that white space gives the readers a chance to pause and reflect and process it in their own terms, in their own way. I think of poetry and verse novels as a black and white painting that you give readers, and then they color it with their own imagination or their perspective, their views, their experiences of life, right? So this is what drew me to poetry and drew me to verse novels. And verse novels is actually a hybrid of prose and poetry. It has all the flesh and bones of a prose novel, but it flows like poetry. And because of that, children flip pages, and before they know it, the story ends, and they get that wonderful sense of achievement of having completed a book, and then they are encouraged to go on to the next book and the next book, and then very soon they may even start reading a prose novel. Um, so um, and I write in free verse, which is the only rule that it has is there are no rules. So I'm free to express my thoughts in any way that I want. So that's what drew me to verse novels.
So, would you say that changes the emotional experience of reading for children? Not just about attention spans, like you said, they get to complete the book and feel a sense of achievement, but emotionally as well, it's more impactful.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it is more impactful because not only does the poets or the verse novelist ideas come through, but also their own ideas. And then you won't believe the number of people who have come to me, and the people who have read my book, and they've given me a completely different version of my own story. Like they see it from a different perspective, and I'm my mind is blown. Like it's amazing how you can look at a story from different angles, right? So that's why I love verse novels. It gives you that freedom. It gives the readers that freedom to even the ending of a story. Maybe they can look at it from a different way. So absolutely, I feel that poetry and verse novels, lets the readers feel emotions more than a prose novel.
And how about making children, there's less emphasis, like a lot of parents in fact, prefer giving their kids non-fiction books because they feel that feeds their IQ. But a lot of people say that how about EQ? And do you think that's something that writers need to focus more on, and especially since those are themes quite prevalent in your works, harmony, empathy? So, how do you feel about that? Like, is that something which consciously writers need to focus on when they write for children?
Absolutely. I feel, that is so essential, and that is something that people just take for granted. Um, you know, um, if you're not an emotional person, then I don't think you're really living life to the fullest, right? Information you can get from so many sources, but a child's EQ needs to be developed. Certain, not every child, but some children just it just happens automatically. They have a loving environment at home. They have a loving environment at school, and all that. So it happens naturally for them, but some children do need that and they can get it from the books. And I personally feel that I make sure that my books do have a lot of emotional content in them. I am a emotional person, and I think it comes naturally in my books. But I also make sure that values like empathy and kindness and all that, which is what I look for in a person, which I feel is so important in every person. So I would love if my books promote those feelings in my readers.
So, do you think that are books in today's time the means or one could say popular or an easy way to get kids to, in fact, learn empathy or imbibe values like harmony, living, in a community? Do you think that's books are a channel for that?
Of course, definitely. Yeah. There are many ways of, like TV and cinema and cartoon when kids watch them. They're all ways of promoting good values in children and stories too. But stories, you know, um, they give a book. When you read a story in a book, that it takes the child away from the rest of the world. The child gets to immerse himself or herself in that book, and they're alone in that world. But not so when you're watching TV or cinema or something. It's more of a group activity, but this is an individual activity, and I think it has its own, you know, um, benefits. Reading a book has its own benefits that TV or any other media can't.
So, uh, we write, a part of us writes for ourselves too. So, through your stories and your books, what part of you do you, write for? Like the child in you or the grown up in you? Like, what is it?
Such an interesting question. I never thought of it that way. But I guess I do write majorly for that child in me still. What I would have enjoyed reading as a child. And then the adult part of me comes into play when I want to subtly pass on a message, making sure that the children get something good out of my book, not just all fun, adventure and all of that, but just some life lesson maybe, subtly, not too preachy, but uh, yeah.
Wonderful. So, now on a lighter note, if you could tell us a bit about your reading, what do you enjoy reading?
Um, I love stories that are about animals. I love stories where there are a lot of emotions, and also my one of my favorite books is Wonder. Actually, I have it in my shelf. I always keep it with me. Um, and then I love Charlotte's Web. I love One and Only Ivan. All the stories are about animals, and I love you know the I love something called as the Star Girl, which is a book about a very different, unique girl. Then I love Until the Road Ends. These are all stories full of empathy and kindness. And I keep that in my shelf all the time to get inspired by it. And I refer through them regularly. And so the coming to the stories that I just recently read, It's these two books. One is called The Queen of Waters by Devika, and Devika Ranganathan, and Rangachari, and then this is The Battle of Baramulla. These are the two stories I read recently. I love historical fiction as well, and so most of the books that I read end up being historical fiction. You know, I end up picking them up. Um, so I would recommend these two, actually, very good books. These two books. Very good books, yeah.
Lovely. So apart from your books, of course, and tell us like a big theme, even in your writing, it's about being in nature. So are you someone who really enjoys being in nature and like being surrounded by like wildlife?
I love nature. Yeah, I love nature, but um, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not the one type of girl who would just go out on walks or anything. But like, yeah, I like a bit of gardening. I do sit in my garden and have a nice time with my family and my cats. And I think the more um, as years are going by, I think I'm loving nature more and more. And being in a desert, like I'm in Dubai right now, being in a desert like Dubai, I'm, really missing the nature of Kerala where I am from. So, yeah, nature, I wouldn't say nature is very important to me in the sense that I look at it as my social responsibility to make sure that I'm not harming nature in any way and all that sort of thing. So in our house, we do make sure that we don't switch on the electricity for long. We don't use a lot of plastic bags and all of that. But um, I don't go out for nature walks, or I don't go out for walks. I don't. I'm more of an indoor person that way. But I do know my responsibilities towards nature.